All right, guys. Welcome back to the third podcast in the Hardware Highlights podcast series. Today, we're going to be going over the AMD 5000 series CPUs. What they mean to the community, the market, how they affect people, and really what to look forward to here. So, kind of jumping straight into it. AMD's new 5000 series CPUs, they're kind of the new kings of the CPU world. For a long time, Intel's been on top, boasting the best clock speeds and the best performance, especially when it comes to gaming specifically. AMD's offered more cores for less money for a while now, but they really haven't been able to keep up in that clock speed division. So here they come. They're using that same 7 nanometer chip that they've been using for a while now, still on their AM4 socket, so you don't have to upgrade your motherboard. It's usually just a BIOS update in order to run the chips. And they're coming out with these new CPUs that are boasting some pretty impressive performance that is taking over Intel. So the main thing here is, even with this boost in performance, we're seeing a raise in price as well, which is interesting because AMD's been kind of the king of great performance for low prices for a while. If you wanted a budget system and an entry level system, you could get a great CPU with AMD that was reliable but also cheap. And I have both Luke and Drew here with me to kind of talk this through. So these chips are $50 more expensive compared to previous gen equivalents. If you're looking at the previous gen version of the same chip, they're $50 more expensive than the previous generation, and even comparing that to Intel as well. Luke, I'm going to start with you here. How do you think that's going to affect the industry? Do you think that people are going to buy less of those chips because they're a little bit more expensive now?
I think the people that are looking for performance will look for these newer chips, but the people that are looking to go on a budget might look to go to the older chips just to save a little bit of money if they're making a cheaper build. But obviously, if you want the high end performance, you're going to pay for the higher end product. So um, basically, there's really stepping into the realm of better performance, which obviously comes at a higher cost.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely onto something there. If you want that big performance, you got to pay that big price. Um, that kind of comes without question there. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how Intel comes at this. Now that they have a competitor that's raising their prices, are they going to keep their prices the same? Are they going to raise them? Are they going to lower them? Um, and see where that goes from there. So, Drew, kind of same question for you. How do you think that's going to affect people's, buying points? What are your thoughts on it with the new CPUs?
Uh, I think Ryzen's been really great at giving us a very low barrier to entry um, for personal computing. Um, the Ryzen has always been a budget option, but it's always been a really great option, and especially now is a better option in pretty much every instance. Um, I think it's a very obvious decision for them to raise the price. There's a lot of demand. Um, there's a lot of lifelong Intel supporters who are switching just simply because of the specs that are offered, the performance that you can get out of a Ryzen chip, um, and I think we may even see further increases as demand, goes up. Uh, I think they're going to become eventually, the Intel of the market, and I mean. eh, people are going to go for the older chips as long as people are making budget builds. So, you know,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
I think you're definitely right. That I think people are gonna focus on those older chips, especially for budget builds, because they're no longer that budget option. Back in the day, you could get like a 2600X when that was like mainstream, almost third gen had almost come out, and you could still get a 2600X for $200, which was great. That was a 6 core 12 thread CPU that offered pretty good clock speeds, and you're spending $200 on it, which is pretty good. So kind of running into some of the basic performance, I think our most popular CPU here is going to be the Ryzen 7, like always. They did away with the 5700X. Unsure of why, but they're rocking a 5800X now, and that's their 8-core 16-thread CPU. Boasting probably around a 3.8 to 4.7 gigahertz clock from Boost, which is a great chip. It's a great clock speed to have with such a high core and thread count, which is great. So some of the big numbers, the Ryzen 9, the i9 competitor, their 5950X is coming in at $800 now with 16 cores, 32 threads, which is that's big. Their base clock right around 3.4 gigahertz, which is completely fair, and their boost clock is right around 4.9 gigahertz, which is really impressive. If you can boost to 4.9 on all 16 cores, that's unheard of. We're just hitting that realm of possibility, which is really interesting. So a big talking point I kind of wanted to work off of here was, this new generation came around, and for a long time, AMD has been notorious for providing great CPU coolers with their CPUs. You buy one and the stock cooler is great. You can throw it right in your PC and still get great performance. And that's where another reason they really beat out Intel is because Intel, if they even came with stock CPU coolers, they were horrible. They were these tiny dinky fans that would break, and they provided horrible thermals. So AMD's been notorious for providing these great coolers and reliable coolers that I personally have used both the Ryzen 5 and the Ryzen 7 coolers, and they've been great. And although they are still providing that Ryzen 5 with a stock cooler to put in your system, now they're introducing the Ryzen 7, the Ryzen 9 with no stock cooler, which is interesting because usually, especially with the Ryzen 7, you would get like an RGB cooler. It's just another selling point where, not only do you get that great performance, you get a cool look to it. It was squared off, it had, RGB lights into it, and it made it look a little bit more appealing. And they've decided to do away with that, and they're not selling those coolers with the CPUs anymore. And I'll transition to you, Luke. Do you think that that's going to affect people? Do you think that less people are going to buy them because the coolers? Do you think that has no effect on it? People are going to buy the chips with the chips. Whatever sort of thing you want to kind of go off on.
I think the people are still going to buy the chips for what they are, but a lot of people are not going to be happy that they did not include the cooler, because I know when I got built my PC, I personally got the Ryzen chip because it came with a good CPU and a cooler, and obviously the RGB is fairly attractive when someone looks at it. They think it's a cool PC, and I'm happy with it. It performs great, no problems there, and it's just another little cost with all the other little costs that add up eventually, and yeah, people are not going to be excited to
Right. Yeah.
toss out like $50 on a cooler.
Right. Yeah. It's another cost you have to worry about, and especially when it comes to coolers, it might even just sway people to spend more money where they really don't need to. Maybe I should just get a block and do a closed loop liquid cooling. And that you're getting up to the $100+ mark there. That stuff's expensive when you really don't need it, especially for a Ryzen 7, a basic system with a Ryzen 7. You won't need that liquid cooling, but it might sway people to do it. Same question for you, Drew. Do you think that's going to change people's opinions? Do you think people are going to buy less chips? What are you thinking?
It definitely swayed my opinion a bit because the build that I had just done was a Ryzen 5 build, and I picked it partly due to the fact that it came with a cooler. That is a big selling. Not only is it a better chip, but it's just a better deal overall.
Right.
You know, and it's a reliable cooler, and I've only ever heard great things about it. Um, and I feel that there's going to be a lot of complaints, but I mean, people are going to see it as a necessary evil, And
Right.
what I mean by that is, as these chips are only getting better and better and better, and they're increasing this divide they have between them and Intel, by a lot. Um, and we're going to see a lot of, monetization along the way to, you know, keep up with the quality of the product that they're outputting.
Right. Yeah. No, I think I like that you talked about how it was a big selling point for you, because I think that follows the whole budget thing. If you bought a Ryzen 5, it comes with that cooler. It's a great budget option, and someone who's looking for maybe just a little bit more CPU performance based on their tasks, maybe they want a Ryzen 7. They're still trying to budget as much as they can. All of a sudden that doesn't come with a CPU cooler. So I like that you mentioned that. So yeah, AMD's 5000 series overall looking good. Toppling the the king that currently exists. Intel. Coming out on top. I haven't seen a bunch of benchmarks for these, but they seem very impressive. They seem game changing. So we'll see how Intel's 11th gen compares to them once they come out. I know we're still a while out from 11th gen Intel CPUs, but we'll see. For now, thanks for tuning into the podcast, guys. Our next podcast is going to cover Apple M1 silicon chips, which is a really interesting topic we'll kind of go into. So we'll see you in the next one.